Naomi Fisher is 23 years old when she realizes that the crescent moon mark on her right palm isn't just a birthmark or divine symbol. It's a map. She's carried the mark since birth. A pale silver crescent, approximately 1 inch long, positioned in the center of her palm with the points facing toward her fingers. The mark has defined her entire life in Grace Valley, Pennsylvania, a rural community of 2,000 people, where her family has attended Covenant Baptist Church for 5 generations, and where Naomi has been treated as special, chosen, blessed by God, for purposes that church elders have been speculating about since she was born. Naomi's childhood was shaped by adults' religious interpretations of her mark. She was prayed over constantly, displayed at revival meetings as evidence of God's active presence in the world, treated as living prophecy even though she never received divine messages or performed miracles. The attention was suffocating and isolating. Other children kept distance from someone adults constantly described as chosen and holy. And Naomi grew up lonely despite being surrounded by people fascinated by what she represented rather than who she actually was. She left Grace Valley at 18 to attend Penn State University, studying astronomy despite her pastor's objections that she should pursue theology to better understand her divine calling. The decision created tension with her family and church community, who viewed secular education, especially in science, as rejection of the spiritual significance they'd built around her mark. But Naomi was desperate to be normal, to be valued for her mind rather than her birthmark, to escape the crushing weight of being treated as religious symbol rather than actual person. The discovery happens during her final semester, when Naomi is working on a senior project mapping historical supernova observations across different cultures. She's photographing her notes when she accidentally captures her right hand in the frame, the crescent mark clearly visible in the high-resolution image. Looking at the photograph on her computer screen, zoomed in to check image quality, Naomi notices something she's never seen before despite looking at her mark thousands of times. The edges of the crescent aren't perfectly smooth. They have tiny irregularities, barely visible bumps and indentations that she'd always assumed were natural variation in the skin. But when Naomi overlays her mark's photograph onto a star chart of the night sky visible from Pennsylvania on her birth date, the irregularities align perfectly with specific stars. The crescent's upper point corresponds to Polaris, the North Star. The lower point aligns with Sirius. The bumps along the crescent's curve match the positions of 7 other significant stars: Betelgeuse, Rigel, Aldebaran, Capella, Arcturus, Vega, and Altair. The correlation is too precise to be coincidence, too specific to be random biological variation. If you're watching this video, drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. Naomi spends 3 days verifying her discovery, using different star charts and astronomical databases, testing whether the alignment holds across different dates and viewing locations. The correlation remains consistent only when measured from Grace Valley, Pennsylvania, on the night of her birth, September 23, 2001. The mark on her palm is a map of the night sky as it appeared from her birthplace at the moment she was born, encoded in subcutaneous tissue with precision that biological processes shouldn't be capable of producing randomly. The implications are staggering and terrifying. If Naomi's mark is a deliberately encoded star map rather than random birthmark, then the religious community's interpretation of divine marking might actually be correct in some way she doesn't fully understand. But more troubling is the question of purpose. Why would God, or whatever force created this mark, encode a specific astronomical configuration? What is Naomi supposed to do with this information? What does a star map on a human palm signify about purpose or destiny? She calls her younger brother Aaron, the only family member who didn't treat her mark as religious spectacle, who always related to Naomi as sister rather than as chosen vessel. Aaron is studying computer science at Carnegie Mellon, has the technical skills to help analyze the data, and shares Naomi's skepticism about the overly religious interpretations their church community imposed on her throughout childhood. She sends him the photographs and star chart overlays, asks him to verify her analysis independently, to confirm she's not seeing patterns that don't actually exist because she wants so desperately to find meaning in the mark that shaped her entire life. Aaron confirms the correlation within hours, his message containing equal parts excitement and confusion. The alignment is mathematically precise, far beyond probability of random chance. But Aaron also identifies something Naomi missed: the 9 stars the mark maps to form a specific geometric pattern, a configuration that appears in ancient astronomical texts as significant alignment that occurs only once every several centuries. The last time these 9 stars held this exact geometric relationship was in 1347, the year the Black Death began spreading through Europe. The next time this alignment will occur is September 23, 2027, exactly 26 years after Naomi's birth. The historical correlation is disturbing enough that Naomi begins researching other instances of this 9-star alignment throughout recorded history. She discovers references in astronomical records from Babylon, ancient Egypt, medieval China, and Renaissance Europe. Each time the alignment occurred, it coincided with catastrophic events. The fall of Babylon in 539 BCE, the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, the Justinian Plague in 541 CE, the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. Each alignment marked the beginning of historical periods characterized by massive death, civilizational collapse, or transformation so complete that the world before and after looked fundamentally different. Naomi presents her findings to her astronomy professor, Dr. Ellen Martinez, framing them as theoretical research about historical correlations between astronomical events and human crises, rather than revealing her personal connection through the mark. Dr. Martinez is initially dismissive. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who find correlations everywhere. Historical records are incomplete and biased, and astronomical configurations don't cause terrestrial events, no matter how much ancient cultures believed in astrology. But when Naomi shows her the precise mathematical correlation between the 9-star configuration and the timing of historical catastrophes, when she demonstrates that every documented occurrence of this specific alignment preceded disaster by weeks or months, Dr. Martinez's skepticism wavers. The data is compelling enough that she agrees to help Naomi research further, to access astronomical databases and historical archives that undergraduate students don't have permission to use, to treat this as legitimate scientific inquiry rather than superstitious nonsense. Over the following weeks, they document 17 instances of the 9-star alignment across 5,000 years of human history. 15 of those instances clearly preceded catastrophic events: plagues, famines, wars, natural disasters, civilizational collapses. The 2 instances without obvious correlating disasters occurred in years where historical records are too incomplete to confirm or deny whether catastrophes happened. The pattern is consistent and undeniable. When these 9 stars align in this specific geometric configuration, humanity faces existential threats. Dr. Martinez asks the question Naomi has been avoiding. Why is Naomi researching this so intensively? What drew her to this particular astronomical pattern? Why does she seem personally invested in proving this correlation exists? Naomi shows her the mark, explains that it's a map of the 9-star alignment, reveals that she was born on a date when the configuration was forming, and will reach maturity again in 2027. Dr. Martinez stares at Naomi's palm for a long time, her scientific training warring with evidence that suggests something beyond natural processes encoded astronomical data into a human child before birth. She tells Naomi that this needs to be documented and studied by people with more resources and expertise. That this discovery, if verified, represents either the most important astronomical finding in history or evidence of something that will require rethinking fundamental assumptions about reality and divine intervention. But Naomi refuses to go public. Making this discovery known would bring exactly the kind of attention she spent her entire life trying to escape. Religious communities declaring her prophetic, scientists wanting to study her as anomaly, media turning her into spectacle. More importantly, going public without understanding what the mark means or what she's supposed to do about the 2027 alignment would cause panic without providing solutions. Instead, Naomi makes a decision that will consume the next 3 years of her life. She'll research every historical instance of the alignment, will study what happened during those catastrophic periods, will look for patterns in how humanity responded or failed to respond to existential threats. And she'll search for evidence of other marked individuals, people like her who might have been born during previous alignments, who might have carried encoded information about astronomical configurations, who might provide clues about purpose and destiny that her mark represents. The research leads Naomi to obscure historical texts, religious manuscripts that describe children of the stars, marked with celestial signs, prophecies about chosen ones who appear during times of great change. She finds references to individuals born during previous alignments who were treated as prophets or demons depending on cultural context, who were celebrated or persecuted, who sometimes disappeared from historical records abruptly as though their existence was erased or they were killed to prevent whatever role they were meant to fulfill. Most disturbing is a pattern Naomi identifies in texts from 3 different cultures separated by continents and centuries. All describe marked individuals being given terrible choices during catastrophic periods. A Babylonian text speaks of a child with moon signs who had to choose between her own life and the city's survival. A Chinese manuscript describes a boy marked with celestial characters who faced decision that would determine whether plague continued or ended. A medieval European account mentions a girl with devil's marks who was burned alive after refusing to make sacrifice that priests demanded, followed by the Black Death spreading throughout the region. The texts suggest that marked individuals don't just predict catastrophes. They're supposed to prevent them through choices or sacrifices that involve their own deaths. Naomi is born during an alignment period, carries a map that predicts the 2027 catastrophe. And if the historical pattern holds, she'll face a choice that determines whether the disaster unfolds or is somehow prevented through her decision. Naomi graduates from Penn State in the spring, but doesn't celebrate or job hunt like her classmates. Instead, she uses her savings to travel, visiting archives and libraries throughout Europe and the Middle East, searching for more accounts of marked individuals during previous alignment periods. Her family is confused and hurt by her sudden obsession with historical research, her refusal to explain why she's abandoned plans for graduate school, her evasiveness about when she'll return home. Only Aaron knows the truth about what his sister discovered and why she's desperately seeking answers before the 2027 alignment arrives. In London, Naomi finds a 14th century manuscript at the British Library describing a young woman named Catherine, who bore marks of heaven's wheel on her palms and foreheads. Catherine appeared in London in 1347, just as the 9-star alignment was forming, warning city leaders that plague was coming and that she'd been shown a vision of how to stop it. The manuscript claims Catherine said she could prevent the Black Death spread through London if the city would perform specific rituals and make preparations she described. City leaders dismissed her as mad, and when the plague arrived weeks later, they arrested Catherine as a witch who'd brought the disease through demonic means. The manuscript's final entry describes Catherine's execution by burning, followed immediately by an astronomical event. Witnesses reported that the 9 stars she'd been marked with fell from their places in heaven the moment she died. And the plague spread through London with unprecedented ferocity, killing nearly half the city's population within months. The text's author concludes that Catherine was genuine prophet, whose death removed the only protection God had offered against divine judgment. In Cairo, Naomi discovers a 6th century Coptic text describing a boy marked with moon and stars who appeared during the Justinian plague. The boy, named Makarios, traveled throughout Egypt telling people he could end the plague if they would help him perform a ritual at a specific location during a specific astronomical alignment. Some people believed him, but religious authorities declared him a heretic speaking blasphemy by claiming power over divine punishment. Makarios was stoned to death by a mob 3 days before the alignment date he'd specified. And the plague continued devastating the Byzantine Empire for years afterward. The pattern is consistent across cultures and centuries. Marked individuals appear during alignment periods, claim they can prevent coming catastrophes through specific actions, are rejected or killed by the societies they're trying to save. And the catastrophes unfold after their deaths, as though their elimination removed the only barrier preventing disaster. The marked individuals are offered as solutions to existential threats, but humanity consistently refuses or destroys them before they can fulfill whatever purpose they represent. Naomi returns to Pennsylvania in early 2025, 2 years before the predicted alignment, with a theory that terrifies her, but which the evidence strongly supports. The marked individuals aren't just prophets warning about disasters. They're circuit breakers, people whose existence and choices can interrupt patterns of catastrophe that would otherwise unfold inevitably. The 9-star alignment doesn't cause disasters. It predicts moments when humanity faces existential decision points, and marked individuals are born during these periods as potential intervention mechanisms. But the intervention requires sacrifice. Every historical account suggests the marked person must die at a specific time and place, must make a choice to give their life voluntarily in exchange for preventing or mitigating the catastrophe. Catherine could have stopped the Black Death if she'd been allowed to perform her ritual. But the ritual apparently required her own death as central component. Makarios knew what needed to be done, but couldn't get cooperation from people who would have to facilitate his sacrifice. The marked individuals throughout history failed, not because their solutions were false, but because they either couldn't convince others to help them or were killed before they could complete whatever they were meant to do. Naomi shares her findings with Aaron, who's horrified by the implications. If the pattern holds, if the 2027 alignment follows the same trajectory as previous cycles, then Naomi is supposed to die to prevent whatever catastrophe the alignment predicts. Aaron refuses to accept this, insists there must be another interpretation, argues that ancient texts are unreliable, and that basing life or death decisions on historical patterns is insane, regardless of how compelling the correlations appear. But Naomi knows Aaron is wrong. She's felt it her entire life. The weight of the mark, the sense of purpose she couldn't articulate. The knowledge that being chosen meant something terrible rather than something glorious. The church community in Grace Valley was right that she was marked for divine purpose. They were just wrong about what that purpose entailed. She's not meant to lead religious revival or perform miracles. She's meant to die at the right time and place to interrupt a pattern that would otherwise destroy millions of lives. The question is what catastrophe the 2027 alignment predicts and how her death prevents it. The historical events varied: plague, war, famine, civilizational collapse, suggesting that the catastrophes aren't predetermined, but are somehow related to humanity's vulnerabilities at specific moments. The 21st century faces different threats than medieval Europe or ancient Babylon. Climate change, nuclear weapons, pandemic diseases, artificial intelligence, environmental collapse. Any of these could be the disaster the alignment predicts, or it could be something Naomi hasn't identified yet. She begins researching global threat assessments, studying intelligence reports and scientific papers about existential risks facing humanity between 2025 and 2030. Climate scientists predict that 2027 marks a crucial tipping point, where atmospheric carbon levels could trigger irreversible warming cascades. Epidemiologists worry about novel pathogens emerging from melting permafrost or laboratory accidents. Geopolitical analysts track increasing tensions between nuclear powers that could escalate into conflicts with civilization-ending consequences. The potential catastrophes are numerous and varied, making it impossible to determine which threat the alignment specifically predicts. Dr. Martinez, who's been helping Naomi research remotely, suggests a disturbing possibility. Maybe the alignment doesn't predict a single catastrophe, but rather a moment when multiple threats converge. when humanity simultaneously faces several existential crises that collectively could end technological civilization. The marked individual's role might be to serve as a focal point for intervention, someone whose sacrifice creates the conditions, spiritual, psychological, or physical, for humanity to navigate the convergent threats successfully. But this theory raises impossible questions about mechanism. How does one person's death prevent climate change or nuclear war or pandemic? What possible causal chain connects Naomi's sacrifice to mitigating global threats that involve billions of people and complex systems? The historical texts describe rituals and specific actions, suggesting that the marked person doesn't just die randomly, but must perform specific acts in specific locations at specific times for the intervention to work. Naomi decides she needs to understand what her specific ritual requires, what actions she must take for her sacrifice to be effective. She returns to Grace Valley for the first time in 5 years, reconciling awkwardly with her family and church community, who are surprised and delighted by her return. They interpret her homecoming as prodigal daughter, acknowledging her divine calling, not realizing she's returned to search for information about her birth and marking that might provide clues about her purpose. In her childhood home's attic, Naomi finds her mother's journals from 2001, entries describing the final weeks of pregnancy and Naomi's birth. Her mother wrote extensively about dreams during pregnancy, vivid visions of stars and moons, of standing at a crossroads, while voices told her that her daughter would face terrible choice, of seeing Naomi grown and standing in a place of power, deciding between light and darkness. Her mother consulted pastors about these dreams, who assured her they were spiritual warfare rather than prophetic visions, that the dreams represented demonic attempts to frighten her rather than divine communication about her daughter's future. But one journal entry, dated 2 days before Naomi's birth, describes her mother waking from the most vivid dream yet. Naomi as an adult woman standing in Washington, D.C., near the Capitol building during a moment of national crisis, raising her marked hand toward the sky while 9 stars shone overhead despite it being daytime, choosing to speak words that would end her life but save millions. Her mother wrote that she begged God to take these visions away, that she didn't want her daughter to face anything so terrible, that she prayed Naomi would just be a normal child rather than someone marked for sacrifice. The specificity is startling. Washington, D.C., the Capitol building, speaking words during a crisis, the 9 stars visible during daytime. Naomi researches astronomical conditions for September 23, 2027, discovering that a total solar eclipse will be visible from the eastern United States that day, with the path of totality passing directly over Washington, D.C. During the eclipse's totality, when the sun is completely blocked, the 9 stars of the alignment will be visible in the darkened sky, a configuration that won't occur again for another several centuries. The eclipse transforms abstract theory into concrete timeline. Naomi knows when and where her sacrifice must occur. September 23, 2027, in Washington, D.C., during the eclipse when the 9 stars are visible. She has 2 years to determine what words she's supposed to speak, what choice she's meant to make, what specific actions will constitute the ritual that prevents catastrophe. And she has to convince someone, government officials, religious leaders, the public, to allow her to perform whatever sacrifice is required, to not dismiss her as insane or arrest her as threat when she attempts to fulfill purpose that will cost her life. Aaron begs her not to go through with this, argues that visions and historical patterns aren't sufficient justification for suicide, that there must be other ways to address whatever threats humanity faces in 2027. But Naomi has accepted what she is and what she's meant to do. The mark was never blessing or honor. It was responsibility, burden, countdown to moment when she'd have to choose between her life and the continuation of civilization. She's been marked since birth for this specific purpose, and refusing to fulfill it means failing everyone who'll die in the catastrophe she could have prevented. The remaining question is what she's supposed to say. What words constitute the ritual of sacrifice that historical marked individuals attempted but failed to complete. The 18 months between discovering the eclipse timeline and September 23, 2027 pass in a blur of preparation and growing dread. Naomi attempts to contact government officials, writes to the president, tries to warn climate scientists and defense officials about the convergence of threats during the alignment. Every attempt is dismissed or ignored. She's just another person claiming divine revelation, another conspiracy theorist insisting that astronomical events predict disasters, another mentally ill individual requiring psychiatric intervention rather than platform to share apocalyptic visions. The only people who take her seriously are Dr. Martinez and a small group of researchers who verified the historical correlations, but who are powerless to convince broader institutions that the threat is real. They form an informal advisory group, helping Naomi research what words she's supposed to speak, what ritual the sacrifice requires, what specific actions will interrupt the catastrophe pattern. But the historical texts are maddeningly vague. They describe marked individuals speaking truth that heaven demanded, or offering words that paid the price, without specifying what those words were or why speaking them proved fatal. Aaron becomes Naomi's shadow during this period, refusing to leave his sister alone, terrified that she'll attempt the sacrifice prematurely, or that someone will harm her before the alignment date arrives. He's caught between supporting Naomi's conviction that she's meant to prevent catastrophe and hoping desperately that she's wrong, that the correlations are coincidence, that September 23, 2027 will pass without anything happening, and his sister will be forced to confront that she spent years preparing to die for nothing. By summer 2027, global conditions have deteriorated in ways that make Naomi's warnings seem prophetic. A novel coronavirus variant has begun spreading through Asia, showing characteristics that suggest it could become pandemic more severe than COVID-19. Climate-related disasters have intensified. Record heat waves, catastrophic floods, agricultural failures that threaten food security for hundreds of millions. Tensions between nuclear powers have escalated over resource conflicts, with military incidents bringing the world closer to large-scale war than at any point since the Cold War. The convergent crises that Dr. Martinez predicted are materializing exactly as the alignment approaches. Naomi travels to Washington, D.C., 2 weeks before the eclipse, accompanied by Aaron and Dr. Martinez. They rent an apartment near the National Mall, positioning themselves for whatever will happen on September 23rd. Naomi spends the days walking the city, praying for guidance about what words she's meant to speak, trying to understand the mechanism by which her death prevents catastrophe. The mark on her palm has begun to glow faintly at night, visible luminescence that suggests something is changing as the alignment date approaches. 5 days before the eclipse, Naomi wakes with clarity she's never experienced before. The words she's meant to speak aren't magical incantations or religious formulas. They're a choice offered to humanity through her as intermediary. At the moment of alignment, when the 9 stars are visible during eclipse totality, she'll be given understanding of 2 futures. One where humanity navigates the convergent crises successfully despite terrible costs, and one where the crises overwhelm civilization and billions die in cascading collapse. Her role is to speak these futures aloud, to make them real possibilities rather than just potential outcomes, and then to choose which future manifests by offering her life as payment for the better path. The mechanism is metaphysical rather than physical. Her sacrifice doesn't directly cause climate change to reverse or pandemics to end, but it creates what Dr. Martinez calls a probability collapse, forcing one timeline to become actual while the other fades into might have been. The marked individuals throughout history failed because they were killed before they could complete the ritual. Because speaking the futures requires being alive at the precise moment of alignment when the 9 stars are visible. Because the choice must be made freely rather than under coercion or during execution. Naomi shares this understanding with Aaron and Dr. Martinez, both of whom are horrified by implications they can't deny. Aaron begs his sister one final time to reconsider, to live and let whatever happens happen. to prioritize her own existence over abstract obligation, to prevent futures that might not actually occur. But Naomi is at peace with what she's always known. Being marked meant being chosen for sacrifice, and the sacrifice only has meaning if made willingly at the appointed time. September 23, 2027 arrives with unsettling normalcy. The eclipse will reach totality over Washington, D.C. at 2:47 p.m., visible for 3 minutes and 14 seconds, during which the 9 stars will be observable in the darkened sky. Millions of people have gathered to watch the eclipse, unaware that one marked woman plans to use those 3 minutes to determine humanity's future. Security is heavy because of the crowds and ongoing global tensions, making Naomi's plan to reach the Capitol building steps, where her mother's vision showed her standing, extremely difficult. But Aaron has planned for this, using connections from his tech work to forge credentials that get them through security checkpoints. By 2:30 p.m., Naomi stands on the Capitol steps, surrounded by eclipse watchers wearing protective glasses, waiting for the moment when the sun will be covered and the stars will appear. Her marked hand is uncovered, the crescent glowing visibly now, drawing attention from people nearby who photograph it thinking it's some kind of artwork or special effect. At 2:43 p.m., the moon begins covering the sun. The temperature drops noticeably. Shadows become strange and sharp. Birds fall silent as they do during sunset. The crowd's excitement builds as totality approaches, people counting down seconds until the sun will be completely hidden. Naomi removes her eclipse glasses, knowing she needs to see the stars directly despite the danger to her vision, needing to witness the alignment that's been encoded in her palm since birth. Totality arrives at exactly 2:47 p.m. The sun disappears behind the moon, revealing the corona's ethereal glow around the darkened disk. And there, in the darkened sky, visible without telescopes or instruments, 9 stars shine with impossible brightness. Polaris, Sirius, Betelgeuse, Rigel, Aldebaran, Capella, Arcturus, Vega, and Altair, arranged in the exact geometric configuration that matches Naomi's mark, that has preceded every historical catastrophe documented in 5,000 years of human records. The visions hit Naomi like physical force. She sees 2 futures simultaneously, both real and possible, both equally likely to manifest depending on choice she makes in the next 3 minutes. In one future, she sees humanity struggling through the convergent crises, pandemic killing hundreds of millions, climate change triggering famines and conflicts, nuclear exchange destroying cities, civilization fragmenting into survival enclaves while billions die. But she also sees survivors adapting, learning, building something new from the ruins, humanity continuing despite catastrophic losses. In the other future, she sees the crises resolving more quickly, the pandemic controlled through breakthrough treatment, climate agreements actually implemented, nuclear tensions defused through diplomatic miracles, humanity pulling back from the brink through combination of luck and unprecedented cooperation. Fewer people die, civilization remains largely intact. The future is recognizable rather than apocalyptic. But this better future requires payment, her life offered as sacrifice that somehow tilts probability toward cooperation rather than collapse. That gives humanity the chance to choose wisely rather than defaulting to catastrophic paths. Naomi understands finally what the ritual requires. She must speak both futures aloud during the remaining minutes of totality, must describe them in detail so that everyone listening understands what hangs in the balance, and then must declare her choice to pay for the better future with her life. The speaking itself will kill her, not through physical mechanism, but through metaphysical transaction, where consciousness exchanges places with possibility, where she ceases to exist in the timeline she's choosing to make real. She begins speaking, her voice amplified somehow beyond normal human capacity, reaching everyone gathered on the National Mall and broadcasting through phones that people are holding to record the eclipse. She describes the dark future first, the pandemic spread, the climate, catastrophes, the nuclear fires, the billions dead, the civilization broken. People listening are confused and frightened, wondering who this woman is and why she's speaking apocalyptic visions during the eclipse. Security moves toward her, but Aaron and Dr. Martinez block their path, buying seconds that Naomi needs to complete the ritual. Then she describes the better future. The treatments found, the agreements honored, the diplomacy successful, the cooperation achieved, humanity surviving and learning. She explains that this future is possible but requires payment, that she was marked from birth to offer herself as price for probability shift that makes better path real rather than just theoretical. She raises her marked hand toward the 9 stars overhead, feeling the crescent burning with light that matches the star's brightness. I choose the better path. Naomi speaks clearly, her final words. I choose humanity's survival over my own. I choose hope over collapse, cooperation over catastrophe. The future where we learn rather than the future where we perish. This is my purpose, my sacrifice, my choice freely made. Let it be so. The 9 stars flare impossibly bright at the moment she finishes speaking, light visible even in the eclipse's darkness. Naomi's marked hand burns with matching radiance, the crescent on her palm glowing like captured starlight. Then she collapses, her body falling to the Capitol steps, while her consciousness dissolves into the timeline she's chosen to make real, paying the price that marked individuals have tried to pay throughout history, completing the ritual that Catherine and Makarios and countless others died before they could finish. Aaron catches his sister's body, screaming her name, searching desperately for pulse or breath and finding neither. Dr. Martinez pushes through the crowd, performing CPR while knowing somehow that it's useless, that Naomi isn't unconscious or injured, but is simply gone. Her life traded for the probability shift she described. Security finally reaches them, demanding explanations that no one can provide, surrounding the body of a woman who just died speaking prophecies during a total solar eclipse, while 9 stars shone overhead in configuration that hadn't occurred in 6 centuries. The totality ends at 2:50 p.m., the sun emerging from behind the moon, light returning to Washington, D.C. The crowd stunned and confused about what they just witnessed. Videos of Naomi's speech spread across social media within minutes, her words about 2 futures and sacrifice becoming viral phenomenon that billion people watch within hours. Some dismiss her as mentally ill woman who died from medical emergency during the eclipse. Others claim she was prophet revealing divine truth. Still others insist she was performance artist staging elaborate hoax. But in the weeks and months that follow, the convergent crises begin resolving in ways that seem miraculous. The pandemic variant proves less deadly than initially feared. Breakthrough treatments emerge from unexpected research directions. International cooperation on pandemic response improves dramatically. Climate negotiations produce agreements that are actually implemented. Renewable energy deployment accelerates beyond projections. Nations begin cooperating on emission reductions in ways that seemed politically impossible weeks earlier. Nuclear tensions diffuse through diplomatic breakthroughs that analysts can't fully explain. Leaders choosing cooperation over conflict in moments where history suggested escalation was inevitable. Aaron spends the rest of his life trying to understand what his sister did, whether her sacrifice actually caused the better future, or whether she simply predicted outcomes that were already likely. He can never prove causation, can never demonstrate that Naomi's death changed probability rather than just coinciding with fortunate events. But he knows what he saw. The 9 stars flaring, the mark burning, his sister's choice made freely at the moment when humanity's future hung in balance. The crescent moon mark on Naomi's palm was a code from God, predicting the end of the world, not an inevitable end, but a decision point. A moment when humanity could choose catastrophe or survival. And her role was to make the better choice possible through sacrifice that marked individuals have been attempting throughout history. She decoded the end of the world and then prevented it, paying the price that her mark always represented, fulfilling the purpose she was born to serve. The video ends with Aaron visiting Naomi's grave, where the headstone bears the dates of her birth and death, and a carved image of a crescent moon surrounded by 9 stars. He places flowers and speaks to the sister who chose humanity's future over her own life, who was marked from birth for sacrifice. She accepted with grace and courage. The camera pans up to show the night sky, where the 9 stars have returned to their normal positions. The alignment broken, the catastrophe averted, the world continuing because one woman understood what she was meant to do and did it, despite knowing the cost. The crescent moon in her palm was God's code, and Naomi Fisher deciphered it and paid the price it demanded. Choosing light over darkness, hope over despair, humanity's survival over her own existence.